Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Gregory, and this is Accounting 667 Advanced Audit. This chapter is going to go over some legal, regulatory, and professional environment areas. Now, as a member of the CFE and as a certified fraud examiner, when we are involved with cases, we still have to understand some of the basic legal premise that surround a case. Oftentimes we get mostly caught up in the accounting part, but we also have to understand that we're partnering with law enforcement. So we have to understand some areas of law enforcement and the legal and regulatory environment. So talking about court, there's really two courts. There's criminal and civil. Now, we'll take on civil first because that's the easiest. Any dispute could be prosecuted in the civil court. You can have people making claims against each other. You can have businesses, organizations, governments, etc. One that I was involved with a few times is when, in a civil case, for example, a marina would sue a boat owner because they hadn't paid their marina fees, and they would show cause in court, and if they did do it sufficiently, the court could have that boat impounded. And at one time we did have to go up and seize a boat for a civil case. We go up, we quote unquote arrest the boat, we put a notice on that it's been seized by the U.S. Marshals Service. When I was working with them, we would then transport that boat to a safe location. So companies could do that. Governments can sue people, individuals, for not paying their taxes. For example, your tax for owning a home. You have some jurisdictions have some time before the home can be seized for non-payment of taxes. So in a civil case, you could pretty much determine any claim against another person or party. Switching over to the criminal side, any individual, a private person, can report a crime, a burglary, vandalism, theft, as well as businesses. Businesses can report crimes. Government can report crimes. The government entities can report a crime such as a company in violation of OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety Administration rules, or taxing agencies, or public health. However, only the government can start a criminal case. You could sue somebody in a civil court for wrongful death of a person, but you cannot put them through a criminal court. Only the government can do that through the attorney's offices. So they can start a criminal case. Now, while a criminal case may be going on, if a person isn't satisfied with the outcome of the criminal case, then they can sue civilly. For example, in the O.J. Simpson trial, while he was acquitted criminally of the crime, the family of the survivors sued Mr. Simpson civilly and won a lawsuit from them. Now, civil and criminal cases can be simultaneous, but that's pretty rare. Usually, the defendant wants to go through the criminal side first before going through the criminal side, because, through the civil side. And that's because in the civil side, if there's evidence brought up during the civil case, that can be used in the criminal case. And so they often don't want that. And the criminal case is harder to prove. There has to be beyond reasonable doubt. versus in a civil case, just the preponderance of the evidence can lead someone to a verdict. So here's just a little recap. Criminal crimes can be reported by anyone, but only the government can bring forth a case. Now, most fraud crimes are settled out of court for a single count. I have been involved in many fraud cases where there could be 30, 40, even 50 counts of fraud against someone. But all they have to do is plead guilty to one. And it's usually wire fraud or mail fraud. That's the easiest one to plead out on, and it gets the lesser of all the sentences. Civilly, disputes between businesses, government, as I said, failure to pay a boat mortgage, IRS taxes, non-compliance, and they can be pursued if the criminal outcome is not believed. If they feel like the criminal outcome was not what they wanted, they can pursue, as I said, the O.J. Simpson wrongful death case. Now, again, in fraud cases, civil and criminal actions can be prosecuted separately or at the same time. What usually happens is that the criminal crime takes much longer. There are still active court cases of criminal crimes that have gone on for years. So the civil crime or the civil side of the court doesn't even get a chance to look at what's going on until the criminal court is done. So that could take years down the line before everything is gone through the court system. We know that the Constitution supports different rights, and I want to go over these 4 amendments to the Constitution because they are really the basis of how we bring cases to the court system and what protections people have. Now, one thing I do want to say, and we will touch on this with the 5th Amendment, is even though you are a citizen and you have certain rights, such as invoking the 5th Amendment, employees may have fewer rights than citizens because employees are usually under some type of contract. So there may not be the presence of privacy and confidentiality or self-incrimination in certain employee situations. But we're going to cover the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 14th Amendment. Now, under the 4th Amendment, that pertains to searches and seizures, unlawful searches and seizures. On the left side is the amendment itself. Unlawful searches and seizures include persons, houses, papers, effects against unreasonable searches. So what the court does is require a warrant to seize. And they must have probable cause. It must be signed by an officer of the court. It's got to be specific to the person, the nature, the place, the thing. So if we are seizing a home, we have to give, usually we not only give the address of the home, but we also do the coordinates, the plot coordinates of the home to ensure that even though maybe the address might be wrong, the coordinates of the plot of land is correct. So we could seize a home if it was a home that that used prostitution or drug offenses. And we are basing the warrant on the totality of the circumstances, unless there's a reason that by law enforcement that a crime has or is about to be committed. So you may search a car if you have arrested the person for maybe driving intoxicated. There may be something that the law enforcement officer may see that would allow them to search the vehicle for anything else, such as drug paraphernalia. The Fifth Amendment is guarantees the right to a grand jury, forbids double jeopardy. You cannot be convicted twice for the same crime, and protects from that self-incrimination. So it's people that plead the Fifth. I choose not to answer that question on the grounds that it might incriminate me. We can invoke the Fifth Amendment as an employee in a fraud case. An employee can, but they may be subject to termination, and that's just dependent on the environment that they are working in. Public employees are held to a higher standard because they swear an oath to protect and defend the United States, and they can invoke the Fifth Amendment without reprisal. I think we've probably seen this in the January 6th hearings where people have invoked the Fifth Amendment, and they may follow the Miranda warnings. The Sixth Amendment is the rights of the individual to have a speedy trial, a right to an impartial jury, and a right to know who your accusers are and the evidence that's placed against you. Now, let's talk about this from the employee point of view. There are some rights that employees have, but there are some limits to those rights. For example, an employee has the right to prohibit the invasion of their privacy, but it may not extend to perhaps their employee lockers, their email, maybe their desk, because those are actually property of the company. And so in certain circumstances, while the employee has a right to privacy, they may not have a right to privacy when it comes to employer-owned assets. They have rights for public disclosure of private facts, such as being outed. They have the right to be protected from intentional emotional distress and defamation if it's unfounded. And finally, under the 14th Amendment, it's depriving anyone from life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Due process is to stand in front of a court and have your case heard. Now, due process is also coming into play when we go into the searches and seizures where we need, without a warrant. So the law enforcement, if they take someone into custody, they would have immediate control over a vehicle, over a house, over that person, that they may search that person without a warrant. There is no warrant needed if illegal items are in plain view. For example, if someone is pulled over for maybe intoxication and they see a bag of drugs in plain view or a satchel full of money in plain view, they can seize that without a warrant. And to know that the U.S. Homeland Security, Borders and Customs Service has exceptions to searches without warrants when it comes to human trafficking. They can pull over a van if it appears to be suspicious and open up that van to see if there may be human smuggling going on. And they can do that without a warrant. Now we're just going to touch on a few little items, such as different methods of investigations. One of these is surveillance. We can do a stakeout, following the person, videographing, poll cameras, wiretapping. Now, this is all on the law enforcement side, but you have to be aware as a certified fraud examiner that that's data. That could be evidence. We had a case in Washington State where we were investigating someone selling drugs out of a home. Law enforcement put a poll camera up so that they could videotape people coming in and out of that home at odd times of the day and night in order to secure evidence in their case. We have privileges. We have attorney-client privileges. We have attorney-work product privileges. We have physician-patient privileges, clergy privileges, marital privileges that we cannot break. But as an accountant, if you are looking at an accountant's books, there is no accountant-client privilege. And that's because the Treasury Department allows the IRS to sue people for non-payment of taxes, and the work product of that accountant is part of that suit. So there is no accountant-client privilege. Oftentimes, CFEs or CPAs or fraud investigators are giving expert testimony, and it allows the admissibility of expert testimony as long as it's based on that the reasoning, the methodology, that it's scientifically valid. You are using standards and regulations to audit the books of a client. The testimony is applied to those facts at the issue, nothing else. We are not experts in behavior. We are not experts in rationale, but we are experts in the flow of transactions. And that's what we're giving our testimony on. And it can be grounded in facts such as seminal texts. And seminal texts can be the accounting regulations and standards. This is how GAAP is used in looking at inventory valuation. And this is what we did, which was based on that seminal work of GAAP. One thing as an expert, you're going to be challenged on your credentials. So it's always important that you keep your CPE up. You are taking courses that are designed to help you as a forensic accountant in order to create that credibility. Now, back in chapter 4, we talked about evidence. And so we're just going to review it. Evidence is anything. And without evidence, you have no proof that a crime was committed, and therefore you have no conviction. So you need evidence, direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. But it has to convince a jury or the court that the evidence that you're providing is relevant to the case, and it has to be trustworthy. So when we're working with documents, the documents need to be secured with that chain of custody so that there is no appearance or basis for saying that that document was manipulated by you or by the prosecuting attorney. So it has to be trustworthy. As we said, anything can be evidence. Real, demonstrative, documentary, and testimonial. You've gone over this before, but I just wanted to bring this back again as it's reiterated in the chapter. We want to make sure that the documents are not forged. We prefer the original. Normally that will be kept in evidence and you will work off of a copy. not based on hearsay, that it's authenticated and it's reliable. For us, our role is to make sure that we understand the accounting basics. I think that that's where some students may have gotten a little sideways on case 9-1, in which you had to go through and identify sources and uses of cash. That's fairly basic, but it's very important that you understand how transactions flow through the system, because you're going to be the expert on explaining why something is a source of cash that maybe didn't come from their business, or they spent money on something that they claim was a use of cash for the business, but it really didn't come from the operations of the business. So we want to do tracing and vouching. We want to make sure that we understand what regulations and auditing procedures are in place. We need to understand accounting systems, all kinds of systems. We have to look at the idea of non-financial data through comparisons of competitor businesses, statistical information, and the financial statements. Now, we have our regulatory system that we have to fall under. The AICPA, the FASB, the GASB, PCAOB, Sarbanes-Oxley. There's a number of those. So the text brings out a few of these, but just know that for our roles, we are held under very high standards, both within our own agencies, the FASB, the GASB, the AICPA, but also legislations such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act or the Frank-Dodd Act. And here's just a couple more. I mentioned the Frank-Dodd Act. You might want to take a look at this. This is the Wall Street Reform Act. It has information on consumer protection, bonuses, bailouts, investor protection. This occurred because of the financial failures of banks back in 2008 during that mortgage crisis, where banks were offering loans to people who really should not have qualified for loans, but they took them what they called NINA loans, which is no income, no assets. So you could go to a bank back in 2007, 2006 and get a loan on a home and not have to declare any income or any assets. Kind of crazy, isn't it? Some banks failed because of that. Now, parts of Dodd-Frank have been repealed. So as you look at Dodd-Frank, don't look at the original. You'll have to look at the current standings of where Dodd-Frank is, because some consumer protections and bailouts have been repealed by the government. Here's another regulatory system that is mentioned. It's the Institute of Internal Auditors. It's how we, as auditors, separate ourselves between internal and external issues. So internal auditors are responsible for investigating fraud within the company. And finally, the role of corporate governance. So corporate governance, we always look at the corporate side to say, how are you leading your organization through the tone at the top? Well, we found over the years, especially starting back prior to 2002, that corporations were kind of operating a little on the loose. And here's 3 examples. Enron. They used off-balance sheet accounting and shell companies that not only led to their collapse, but also to the collapse of Arthur Andersen, which was one of the largest CPA firms in the nation and globally. Tyco, a receipt of approximately $600,000 of compensation by cheating their shareholders. Now, on that side, PricewaterhouseCoopers was also fined $225 million for allowing these overinflated compensations from the shareholders to go to the corporate managers. Satyan was buying percentages of other competitors' company using fictitious assets in related party transactions. So they were buying pieces of other companies, their competitors, and taking over their competitors with false assets. So corporate governance is extremely important, and that's why through the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, management must now state in writing that they are responsible for the internal controls of their company and the financial results of their company. If you have any questions, please post those to class questions for the good of the group. You can send me a message through Halo, or you can set up a meeting with me through Calendly. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the classroom.